If you haven't been paying attention to Xbox, it's been systematically getting a lot better. I know many of you pay pretty close attention to what is going on to Xbox, meaning the hardware, the software, the games, the Game Pass, and everything in between if I somehow miss something. But as we look back at what happened in September, Xbox just continues its pretty consistent and systematic march towards improvement. Now, the console is approaching its first birthday, and we all know it's still really hard to actually get one, myself included. I'd actually thinking about picking up a Series S for my upstairs, but getting your hands on one is just not very easy, and Uncle Phil has said that's going to be going into 2022. But if you do have one and you are in the Xbox ecosystem, it has gotten a lot better since launch, and last month it got a lot better, if you will. So let's just kind of dig through some of the bigger announcements that Microsoft talked about in September and how they're impacting things, and plus that 30 million number that has been floating around. So the first thing up, Microsoft says, hey, if your TV supports it, the Series X consoles, the next gen or current gen consoles, I should say, now support Dolby Vision. So for no additional dollar dues out of your pocket, you are getting enhanced visual clarity if your device supports it. That just kind of coming along now. That's a great little thing. Other things that have been happening too. Proper Edge is now included on the console. Microsoft announced that they were going to be bringing it here. It has taken a long time, but I was honestly quite surprised at how many people reached out and said, hey, I actually use the Edge browser on the console on my couch when I'm just screwing around effectively. And so now that the Proper Edge is on there, it's going to make your browsing experience just a lot better. And again, these are just part of the system updates that Microsoft is delivering to the consoles. They've also announced this month, now we knew this one was coming and it's now starting to roll out, that the DLI, or the Dynamic Latency Input Update, is starting to roll out, at least for insiders, to the controllers for the next generation consoles. I always look around like I have one sitting here, because I usually do. But if you have a last, quote-unquote, last-gen controller, which includes the Elite Series 2, Microsoft is starting to roll out those updates that's going to make the controller better and, like the name suggests, increase the latency, or reduce the latency with dynamic latency input, but it increases the feedback mechanism of using the device on your big television. So again, those are things that are coming. Microsoft is also bringing its cloud gaming streaming service directly to the consoles. Now, this is available right now to a select group of alpha insiders, of which I have been playing with, and it's a pretty big update at the end of the day. Again, this is just another enhancement that is coming to the service. And when you start looking at things like, hey, here's a new browser, here's Dolby Vision, here's streaming coming to it, here's your controller getting updated. Like, when you start to put all these things together, there's actually kind of like a lot going on. And that's not even all that Microsoft announced during the month. They've also talked about, hey, they're bringing Hdmi Cec Features, which is a fancy way of saying if you have one of these guys that supports the correct protocols, you can now control, again, if you're part of the insider program, which is rolling out up through the rings, you can control your device with the remote. It just makes it much easier to navigate. Like, as an example, on my TV, going from the Apple TV over to the console, you can just use one remote to rule them all, and it makes things just a little bit better to navigate and use the hardware. And if you're not necessarily on the console, because I totally understand that it is quite hard to get your hands on one, Microsoft is also bringing console streaming inside your own home, which I know you realize you do need, but they're also bringing the streaming portion of Xbox Cloud Gaming to the desktop PC application, which is a much better and unified experience. It's like you just open up the Xbox app and it's in there. And so Microsoft has rolled out just a ton of updates. And keep in mind, none of this is really costing you any money unless you're buying a console. These are all just enhancements to the console software that is just making life better. Now, on to the sort of bigger information of the week, or I should say the month, is that during an interview with Take-Two, Strauss Zelnick said, kind of casually dropped that Microsoft is either at or getting close to approaching 30 million Game Pass subscribers. Now, I do believe there's like multiple parts of this. First off, Phil Spencer was a part of the interview and quickly shot it down. Like, our public number is 18 million. And somebody probably was reaming him on the backside saying, you can't announce these numbers, because Microsoft very clearly would be talking to their partners and upselling everybody on the actual figure that is being utilized. Because at the end of the day, Microsoft has to go to companies like Take-Two and be like, hey, put your stuff in Game Pass. And they're like, why would we do that? Like, well, we got 30 million subs. Now, you can't talk about that number. And then it leaks out, and Microsoft absolutely is communicating that, I can guarantee it, to their partners as they try to court more eyeballs to or more games to the service because there's a lot of eyeballs there. Now, is 30 million a good number? It would seem so. Now, there's a lot of comparables you need to kind of look at. Like if you look at something like Netflix, maybe not so much, or you look at something like Spotify, maybe not so much either. But in the game streaming world, you got to understand that Microsoft is truly carving new territory here. I guess the closest comparable, and I'm sure there's others out there. I guess, well, obviously Stadia would be a close comparable, but also Apple Arcade would be an interesting comparable as well, because they're all chasing the same type of dollars, but we don't really have great insight into Microsoft's, and this is probably the closest figure that we get from somebody who would be in the know would actually be able to talk about this. So 30 million honestly probably seems about right. I know over the summer we were hearing somewhere around 22 to 25 million. Now, adding that many million over the fall would be quite a few, or the last couple months of summer would be quite a bit, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's somewhat within the ballpark, which again, Microsoft is leveraging that to get more titles in there, and we know that it does work out for the most part for developers see a positive uprate of people downloading games or playing the games, and so that business model continues to benefit Microsoft and hopefully their partners as well as they carve territory and try to establish the longevity of the platform. I mean, one of the things that I don't think a lot of people really give credit Microsoft for is these bets that they make for things like Game Pass, for example, are months, if not even years in the making to try to get the funnel lined up to get all this content flowing. It takes a lot of effort. And then you bundle on top of that. Microsoft isn't just doing content through Game Pass. They're also doing things like new features for be able to control it. They're also moving Game Pass into new territories, which requires a lot of it. They're continuing to push software updates to their consoles. They're continuing to make consoles. And you can begin to see how Microsoft is really, really in lockstep right now, putting out a lot of updates. That is one of the things that Microsoft, I think, is really separating. Not that last generation didn't have this, but it does feel like Microsoft is more on top of pushing active and more frequent updates and honestly more meaningful updates to the consoles that people really want. One of the things that we're still floating around waiting for is if there's ever going to be any more dynamic or more changes to the UI. We know that a higher res version is rolling out. I'm not expecting a major overhaul to the UI at some point or in the near future, but it does feel like Microsoft is maybe on the cusp of trying a different I don't know, iterations now that Windows 11 is going to launch next week, and they might try to refresh that eventually. But as of right now, we don't have any official word from Microsoft on any sort of UI refresh at the end of the day. But when you look at what Microsoft is doing, it's kind of hard not to be excited about where Xbox is headed. Hopefully that they keep this momentum with the updates coming fast and heavy, because adding features like this gives them additional marketing points like, hey, look, the console's continuing to get better than it was last month. And we're heading into the season where Microsoft typically does ship a lot of updates. The summer months are often always quiet, specifically like the July, August timelines. Obviously, we saw a lot going on in September, and I would expect October to be pretty well packed as well, because Microsoft is again pushing heavily towards that marketing messaging for the holiday shopping season. And specifically because there's not going to be readily available consoles, I'd be looking for a strong Game Pass message here to start to materialize this month. Anyways, we'll be looking forward to that 30 million number. The question becomes is when will Microsoft likely announce the next timeline? The best bet would be on their quarterly earnings. I was expecting it last time, but we didn't get that information. And so their next quarterly earnings should be coming up here in a little bit as they report Q3, now that we are in officially Q4. So that would be, what about we'll say 3.5 weeks, something like that would be about the right time for that type of an announcement. They could do it earlier, but because it's tied into financials, quarterly earnings are typically better times for something like that. So just be on the lookout for that. And if you want to make sure you're updated on everything that is happening in the world of Xbox, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.